We begin part 3, from the first to the second Passover in the public life of Jesus. 1 year, probably from April of 27 of the Common Era to April of 28 of the Common Era. Chapter 1, Cleansing the Temple. A Passover approached. This great festival drew Jews to the temple, not only from all parts of Palestine, but from distant lands. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. On entering the temple, he found in the court of the Gentiles persons selling oxen, sheep, and doves for sacrifices, and near them sat brokers making exchange of money for those who wished to purchase offerings. Perhaps these brokers also changed the foreign money of Jews from a distance into the sacred half shekel, which alone was allowed to be paid for in the temple. Capitation tax levied annually on every Jew of 20 years old and upwards. Compare Matthew 17:24 with Exodus 30:13, 2 Kings 12:4, 2 Chronicles 24:6 and 9. According to Hug, the ancient imposts, which were introduced before the Roman dominion, were valued according to the Greek coinage. For example, the taxes of the temple, Matthew 17:24, Joseph B. Ive 7:6:6. The offerings were paid in these. Mark 12:42, Luke 21:2. A payment which proceeded from the temple treasury was made according to the ancient national payment by weight, Matthew 26:15. This is very doubtful, but in common business, trade, wages, sale, etc., the assis and denarius and Roman coin were usual. Matthew 10:29, Luke 12:6, Matthew 22, Mark 14:5, John 12:5, 6:7. The more modern state taxes are likewise paid in the coin of the nation, which exercised at the time the greatest authority. Matthew 22:19, Mark 12:15, Luke 20:24, Volume 1, page 14. After all, however, some of these words may be translations. And Nakunduchus, or Kunwer, the Little Heat Festival of August, and July. In July is the Little Heat, and in August is the Great Heat Festival, after which it starts to cool, right? Were probably what was being talked about, right? And then from where the Passover originates, and then what was the name for the inundation of the Nile thing in September, but which sometimes coincided with September 11th, by the way. So if you're going to go all conspiracy theory about it, Jesus had witnessed this desecration of God's house every year from his early boyhood. He had seen that secularized and demoralized priesthood allowed it. This actually would bring Jesus closer to the Barabbas figure, because this was something that the Barabbas figure reacted upon. To him, it had become intolerable. He had entered upon his mission. Probably, rumors of him increased the crowd at this festival. 18 years before, in that very spot, he had said that he must be about his Father's business, and he certainly meant the work of God. This was the house of God, and hence so you're attached to the house of worship. That makes you, this word that we're rendering as Son of God, it also has that other meaning. So he would not endure the sight of its desecration longer. The cattle may have stood in by pairs and rope, such rope as they were accustomed to use in his leading beasts to the slaughter lay near. The spirit of the old prophets was upon him. He did not speak. He acted. Seizing the rope, he made a scourge and drove these desecrators out of the temple. Whether he actually applied the lash to their backs, we do not know. His presence, his act, so like that of one of their old prophets, may have exerted such a moral force upon their guilty consciences that they fled before the blow. He ordered the animals away, overturned the tables of the money changers, and cleared the temple. Well, overturning the temples, causing the big old ruckus, probably gave some people a beating. If they didn't consider him insane, they would have tried to drag him off to kill him. That's just how it was, or killed him right there, which is how some of the narrations of this sort of thing. But light and shadows, we have seen him, all sweetness at a wedding, efficiently turning away the shame of a poor but loving bridegroom by miraculous supply of wine. Now, they would have tried to drag him outside to kill him. But if they thought he might get away, they would have. We now behold him, terrible to evildoers. Among the holy poor, he is all gentleness. In the presence of merchants and rulers and multitudes, he is the stern rebuker of the great wrong. The effect of this act upon the disciples was to deepen the impression of his messiahship. Perhaps they recalled the words of John, whose fan is in his hands. They certainly did recollect what David hath sung in his sorrowful exile. The zeal of thy house has eaten me up. Psalm 19:9, isn't? Not 19:9. I mean 69:9. But I was thinking of 100. Isn't 119 like the biggest chapter in the Bible? But that has nothing to do with this. The Jews demand his authority. The Jews demanded his authority for this amazing act. That a man is to be regarded as coming from two classes. The more devout among the people must have long regarded this proximity of the mart to the temple a nuisance which should be abated. When this extraordinary young man, of whom they had heard vague but interesting statements, performed the act so boldly, it must have been agreeable to them, and probably increased their expectations of what he should do afterwards. They hoped he would, by greater deeds of national importance, furnish authority for believing that he did this as a messianic act. Basically, a messianic act would be something that, God would sanction in a way. The worldly and secular hated him for it. Well, also the conservatives, it says the priests are our authority, but could not resent, as he placed it upon a religious ground and had some good people near who approved. All the traitors could do was to make sullen demand for his authority, which they had a right to do, as only the Sanhedrin, or a prophet, could correct abuses in the temple worship, and that latter was always expected to demonstrate his prophetic authority by a miracle. His reply to the demand was enigmatical. It was, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." In order to appreciate the effect of this speech upon his hearers, there are several things to be done. In the first place, we must remember that the disciples themselves did not understand the meaning of the saying until after the death of Jesus, and that neither they nor Jews were furnished with the interpretation of this dark speech, which John gives it in chapter 2, verse 21 and 22. We then must, as far as practicable, reproduce the state of feelings in the hearts of the Jews against which Jesus seemed to have hurled this speech as a courageous reply to their defiance. Towards him, personally, they had no kind feelings, but had been associated with the denunciatory John the Baptist. He had made no overtures to ecclesiastical power or popular favor. His first public act seemed the deed of a zealot. But their temple had become their idol. He himself intimated as much in a rebuke contained in one of his speeches. The temple was the central figure among their national ideals. It had stood in one form or other on the same spot through the centuries, collecting around itself all the tenderest and sublimest associations of devotion and patriotism. It was the visible residence of the invisible Jehovah. It imparted a solemn sanctification to the whole land. It was the heart through which all the national blood flowed. It held those who were resident and attracted Jews from every clime. Their co-religionists dispersed among the nations, having no more place of business in Jerusalem, no more home there, no living associates of their youth there, nothing but sad memories in the city of the sepulchres of their fathers, saw in the vision of the night the temple rise and stretch its arms like a great mother, and heard a voice as from the Holy of Holies call them back in sounds more solemn than the thunder and more thrilling than a love whisper, and they rose. At whatever sacrifice of business or pleasure, they turned their faces towards Jerusalem and stood with awful joy in the courts of the house of Jehovah. Now, if only more people would treat their prayer times like that hear the call. Literally, like nature calls you. You don't even, the clouds or no clouds, you can get to the point where you know the moment that it's, dawn. The horizontal lines of twilight appear, but you can't tell in your area, or they disappear and it's dusk and you can't tell in your area. The evening falls and you can't tell the exact minute, but you can tell the exact minute. The early afternoon comes in, or you're past the middle of the afternoon. All that stuff. The people that heard Jesus speak this fearful enigma recollected that the temple had been defiled. They recalled the days of Antiochus Epiphanes, who had forbidden the observance of the law and had set up the abomination of desolation by making sacrifice to Olympian Jove on the altar of Jehovah. Well, the only issue was the personification, which tell you something about the Christian idea of God literally being a father of a son and all that sort of stuff, and making Jesus out to be the new Baal, sacrificed son of El. They've heard it all before. And they never forgot his loathsome end when the terror and remorse lashed him into an ignominious grave. Compare I forget, what does that stand for? Sick, but I don't think that's Sikkim, but Eclog, don't know what that stands for. Chapter 34, 1, Daniel 11, 31, 12, 11, 1 Maccabees 1:57, Josephus, Antiquities 12:5, 4. The abomination of desolation was probably a small, idolatrous shrine, which was set up in the temple on the 15th of the month Kislew, just 10 days, after which the first victim was offered to Jupiter. The circumstances of the death of Antiochus Epiphanes are narrated in Polybius 21:2 and Josephus Antiquities 12:1. He came to his end, and there was none to help him. They recollected that Crassus, the governor of Syria, on his way from Rome to fight the Parthians, plundered their temple. I find no other authority for this than the paragraph in Josephus Wars 188, but the mention by him shows that how any even reported disrespect to the temple fired the Jewish heart. and went forward to the terrible defeat and captivity to a fearful death amid the desert sands. They had not ceased to feel that it was retribution from God for his temple's sake, which had sent Pompey's head to Caesar and left his dishonored trunk on the shore of Egypt. Pompey's fate is well known to all readers of history. Well, not all readers of history, but Josephus says that Pompey's virtue kept him from carrying off the sacred treasure, but records the fact that he desecrated the temple by entering the holiest of holies, Antiquities 14:4:4, and examining those things in which it was lawful for the priests only to behold. See, that was the whole problem in the first place, is they made the religion about the priests. Their love for their temple was stronger than patriotism or love of home or the instinct of self-preservation. It was a passion and a fanaticism. As truly, as beautifully does Milman say, the fall of the temple was like the bursting of the heart of the nation. And we see this, mother temple, mother church, mother, there's reason why, if it's given gender, that's very often what's being referred to. In such a state of mind, the Jews heard this young teacher declare, "Destroy this temple, and I will rebuild it in 3 days." Any careless speech in regard to the temple was unpardonable, but to talk lightly of its destruction was an intolerable outrage, and that is just what they and his disciples understood him to say, and he knew that they did so understand. The suggestion that he pointed to his body, indicating that he referred to his death and resurrection, is wholly inadmissible. If he had done so, it must have been in the sight of the Jews or of his disciples only. He could scarcely have made this gesture significant to his disciples without also making it apparent to the Jews, and it is not consistent with the general purity and simplicity and elevation of his character to fancy him winking to his disciples and concealing a gesture from the crowd. They believed that he meant the material temple in which they were standing. Their reply shows that 46 years was the temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? This must refer to the completion of some main portion or principal wing of the temple. Herod the Great had a taste for building, and had expended, and was still expending, vast sums and much time on this great work, in which he was assisted by the piety, the wealth, and the patriotic pride of the Jews. From time to time he had commenced this work. To the time this reply was made to Jesus, it was just 46 years. Josephus in his Antiquities 16:11:1, he says that he began in the 18th year of his reign, but in his Wars of the Jews 1:21:1, he says in the 15th, the dates being founded respectively upon the death of Antigonus and Herod's appointment by the Romans. If the latter date be taken, it will give 20 years to the birth of Jesus and 30 years to this Passover, making 50, from which, if we take 4 years to correct our error, the epoch of which is just that much too late, we have 46 years. Alfred on John 2:20 notices that the temple was not completed until 64 of the Common Era under Herod Agrippa II and the procurator Albinus, so that was in building, must have referred to the greater part of the work then completed. Well, are they mixed up details when they wrote this later? Because John could have not even been alive yet when he wrote when this happened. So, it was, to Jewish ears, a preposterous and blasphemous thing in Jesus to intimate that the temple should be destroyed and to assert that he could rebuild it in 3 days. They never forgave him. He had hurt them in every sensibility, and Jesus knew it, and he made no reply and no explanation. In his first public acts, he had exhibited a zeal that seemed headstrong, and he had certainly performed a most politic act, but it cannot be charged as an indiscretion or inadvertence such as occur in every public man's life, and gave him great regrets. Jesus never regretted it. He must have known that he had virtually signed his own death warrant. He awaited the result. We shall see how this one sentence of his rankled the heart of the nation, was made the strength of the indictment on which he was executed, and confronted him in the shape of gibe amid the horrors of his crucifixion. Wasn't Apollonius Christ crucified around 100? Or they wanted to crucify something. Well, the crucifixion part was more part of the Savior deity story, particularly when you have Jesus being the morning star and having it being the solar principle, so the sun being the cross and Venus being, what's on the cross and that sort of thing, He meant his own body. He thought of his death by violence, and his belief that he had power to take up his life again. He knew the unity of his own meaning and comprehended the multiplicity of its relations. It might refer to the desecration of the temple by the men around him, or to the destruction by the Romans. It might refer to the abolition of the Jewish form of religion and the reconstruction of faith on the basis of his resurrection. Here, as throughout his whole public life, compare Matthew 12:40. Well, Matthew 7:22,